Welcome, dear listeners, to Easy English Podcast, where we bring you stories to help you learn English in a simple and fun way. Today has a very special story for you. A story about a closed heart finding its way to openness. It's a tale of quiet moments, unexpected connections, and the subtle ways life changes us. So, grab your cup of tea, relax, and let's dive into a story. My heart used to be a fortress, built brick by brick, locked tight with invisible chains. I was just a little girl when my mother, she simply left. So young, in fact, that I don't hold a single memory of her face, her voice, or even her touch. It's a strange void to carry, a silent question mark in the earliest pages of my life. My father, a man of few words, never spoke about her. When I, with the innocent curiosity of a child, would ask him, "Baba, where is Mama? Why did she go?" he would always give the same unyielding answer. "She's gone, Noor. That is all." His tone was always final, a clear signal that the topic was closed. After countless unanswered questions, I learned to silence them, to swallow the curiosity and the ache deep inside. I learned that some things were simply not to be spoken of. We lived in a small house, modest and sturdy, nestled right by the winding river. It was a place where quiet was the most constant companion. The days flowed into one another with a gentle, almost imperceptible rhythm. Visitors were a rarity, a fleeting interruption in our peaceful solitude. Perhaps a distant relative once a year, or a delivery person, but never anyone who lingered. My father, a man of unwavering dedication, worked tirelessly. He was a skilled mechanic, his hands strong and stained with the grease of countless engines. His small shop was just a short walk from our home, a place filled with the sounds of wrenches clanging and air compressors hissing. He would often return home late, his shoulders slumped with fatigue, his face etched with the day's hard labor. Our evenings were largely silent affairs. He would eat his dinner, a simple meal, in complete quiet, lost in his own thoughts, and then, without much ado, he would go to bed early, preparing for another demanding day. This routine meant that I spent a significant portion of my childhood alone. But I wasn't lonely in the way many children might be. I learned to find comfort in my own company. My world became the pages of books, where I could escape into fantastical lands and thrilling adventures, far removed from the quiet reality of my home. And then there was the river. Oh, the river. I would often walk to its banks, sometimes for hours, simply sitting there, watching the water. It moved with such a mesmerizing slowness, a calm, steady flow that mirrored a stillness I sought within myself. It reflected the sky, the trees, and sometimes my own quiet reflection. I genuinely loved that profound sense of quiet. It was my sanctuary, a place where I felt safe and truly myself. I rarely spoke to others, and I certainly didn't trust them easily. My early lesson about my mother's departure had taught me that people could and often would leave. My father's words, "People leave, don't expect them to stay," became a deeply ingrained truth, a principle I lived by. He had been right about my mother, hadn't he? So logically, he must be right about everyone else. School, as you can imagine, was not an easy place for me. I stood out, a solitary figure in a sea of bustling classmates. The other girls, full of youthful energy, would gather in lively groups, their laughter echoing through the hallways, sharing their little secrets and dreams. I, on the other hand, always sought the quietest corner, my own self-made island. I would diligently complete my schoolwork, meticulously following every instruction. And then, the moment the bell shrieked, I would pack my bag and leave, a swift exit to return to my own world. Some girls, with genuine kindness in their eyes, would try to reach out. "Noor, do you want to play during break time?" one might ask. "Come sit with us at lunch," another would offer. But I always pushed them away. My belief system, rooted in my father's wisdom, told me that friendship was just another form of attachment, a prelude to inevitable loss. I didn't believe in love either. To me, these human connections were fleeting, temporary stops on a long, solitary journey. I observed how quickly allegiances shifted among my peers. One day, a girl would be inseparable from her best friend, sharing everything. The next, they would be with someone entirely new, their old bond seemingly forgotten. I concluded that their feelings weren't genuine. Their words held no lasting weight. Why then would I waste my precious time investing in something so fragile? My focus remained steadfast on my studies, on excelling in my schoolwork, and on helping my father in his shop. I convinced myself that I was perfectly fine alone, that I needed no one else to complete my life. The years rolled on, each one mirroring the last in its quiet predictability. After finishing school, I immediately began working full-time with my father in his car repair shop. It was a life of routine, a comfortable, almost meditative cycle. I would wake up early, often before the sun fully emerged, the sky still a pale gray. I'd head to the shop, where the day would be spent with the rhythmic clang of tools, the hum of engines, and the familiar scent of oil and gasoline. My hands, strong and capable, became adept at troubleshooting and fixing mechanical problems. Evenings were simple. I'd eat dinner with my father, a meal punctuated by comfortable silence and perhaps a few brief words about the day's repairs. Then, exhausted but content, I'd go to bed, ready to repeat the cycle. Life was simple, unburdened by emotional complexities. Life was quiet, a calm current I navigated with ease. I didn't experience profound sadness, but neither did I feel exuberant joy. I simply existed, believing this was the entirety of life, and that I truly needed nothing more. Then, one seemingly ordinary day, everything began to shift. It started like any other morning. I woke up early, had my usual simple breakfast, and walked the short distance to the shop. My father was already there, as was his habit, hunched over the engine of a car. He grunted a greeting, his usual way of acknowledging my presence, and continued his work. I picked up my tools, the familiar weight of the wrenches and screwdrivers comforting in my grasp, and began my own tasks. The air in the shop was thick with the scent of motor oil and metallic dust, a smell that had become as natural to me as the scent of the river. The constant sound of engines being tested, the rhythmic tapping of hammers, and the occasional whir of electric drills filled the space. This was my life. This was the world I knew and understood. Then he walked in. A young man. He stood for a moment, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of the garage, then stepped closer, his footsteps echoing slightly on the concrete floor. He explained that he had a problem with his car. A sputtering engine, he said. I didn't lift my head to look at his face. It wasn't that I was being rude. It was simply that my focus was always on the task at hand, on the machine, not on the person. I honestly didn't care who he was. My only thought was to efficiently diagnose and fix the car so I could return to my quiet work. I wiped my greasy hands on a rag, a habit before addressing customers, and asked, "What's wrong with it?" He began to explain the specifics of his car's issue, but I barely listened. My mind was already dissecting his words, forming a mental checklist of possible causes, picturing the engine parts. Once the car was fixed, it was a simple repair, as it turned out. He thanked me politely. I merely nodded, offering no verbal response. I expected him to pay and then leave immediately, as most customers did. But he didn't. He just stood there, looking around the shop with a curious, almost fascinated expression, as if he had stumbled into a hidden world. "Do you like working here?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly soft. I still didn't meet his gaze. I felt a slight irritation. I really disliked small talk, especially with strangers. He smiled then, a gentle, friendly smile that somehow didn't feel intrusive. "You are very quiet," he observed, his tone amused rather than critical. I remained silent, offering no reply. He chuckled softly, a low, pleasant sound, not loud or attention-seeking like the laughter of others I had encountered. It was surprising, but his laughter didn't bother me. It was almost soothing. I finished writing out his bill and handed him the keys to his fixed car. He thanked me again, a little more warmly this time, and then finally he left. I was sure that was the end of our interaction. But the next day, he came back. My eyes, almost instinctively, found him standing at the doorway. This time, he didn't have a car problem. He just stood there, observing the shop. His presence, a quiet hum in the background. I tried my best to ignore him, to focus on the bolts and wires in front of me. He walked closer, his steps light. "Can I watch?" he asked, his voice still gentle. I frowned, a little annoyed by his persistent presence. "Watch what?" I asked, my voice flat. "You work," he said simply, as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. I shook my head, a clear rejection of his request. But he didn't leave. He just smiled again, his eyes twinkling a little, and said, "Okay, I'll wait outside then." I truly didn't understand him. Why was he here? What could he possibly want from someone as unremarkable as me? For the next few days, he became a regular fixture. He would come to the shop, sometimes asking simple, innocent questions about the cars or the tools, genuinely curious. Other times, he would simply sit outside on the old wooden bench by the door, quietly observing me and my father as we worked. His presence, though silent, began to fill a space I hadn't realized was empty. My father, a man who rarely commented on anything outside of car engines, eventually noticed him. "He's different, Noor," my father remarked one evening, a rare spark of interest in his eyes. I didn't reply, not wanting to encourage further discussion about him. I still didn't want to think about him, not really. But the truth was, his quiet presence, his unasked questions, had already begun to occupy my thoughts, like a new, unfamiliar melody playing softly in the background of my mind. One evening, after the shop had closed, I found myself walking by the river, my usual quiet escape. To my surprise, he was there. He was sitting on a large, smooth rock, his gaze fixed on the gently moving water, just as I often did. I tried to walk past him, to continue my solitary path, but he turned his head, saw me, and smiled. "Do you like the river?" he asked. I stopped. The question was so simple, so direct, yet it struck me deeply. No one had ever asked me such a personal question before. No one had ever noticed my quiet habit of visiting the river. I nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. He didn't press for more conversation. He simply turned back to the water, sitting there in comfortable silence beside me. It felt incredibly strange, this shared quiet. My mind, still a fortress, whispered, "He's just like the others. He'll lose interest. He'll leave soon." But he didn't. And the more he stayed, the more that old familiar fear of abandonment began to stir within me, paradoxically, coupled with a new, subtle curiosity. Days stretched into weeks, then months, and he continued his visits with unwavering consistency. Every morning, he would walk into the shop, a quiet, reassuring presence. Sometimes he would have a small, innocent question about a car part or a repair technique. Other times, he would simply watch me work, his gaze steady and respectful. My father, surprisingly, seemed to genuinely enjoy his company. He even started to smile and nod a greeting when he arrived, a rare display of warmth from my usually reserved father. But I still struggled to truly understand this young man. He was so unlike anyone I had ever encountered. He didn't act like the superficial people I had dismissed in school. He didn't talk too much, never overwhelming me with words. He didn't ask too many probing questions that felt intrusive or demanding. He just stayed, a steady, calm presence. And I still couldn't fathom why. One afternoon, he brought coffee to the shop. He placed a steaming tap on the corner of my workbench, a small act of kindness. "For you," he said, his voice soft. I looked at the cup, then at him, a flicker of suspicion in my mind. I didn't take it. "I don't drink coffee," I stated plainly. He simply smiled, completely unfazed by my rejection. "Then I'll bring tea next time," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I frowned, genuinely perplexed by his persistence. "Why?" I asked, wanting to understand his motives, his hidden agenda. He merely shrugged, a simple, disarming gesture. "Because you work hard," he replied, as if that explained everything. I didn't answer. I just picked up my tools and continued my work, trying to appear unaffected. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father take the coffee cup and smile at him. A genuine, appreciative smile. My father, who rarely approved of anyone, clearly liked him. I still didn't understand why, but the evidence was undeniable. He even started coming in the evenings, too. Sometimes he would sit on the bench by the river, his silhouette against the setting sun. Other times, he would simply walk near the shop as I was finishing up for the day, a silent, comforting presence. He never asked me for anything. He never pressured me to talk. He didn't seem to expect anything in return for his visits, his time. He was just there. I thought for sure he would eventually get bored with my quiet nature, my lack of conversation. I was certain he would tire of my distant demeanor and simply stop coming. But he didn't. He continued to show up, day after day, a quiet, unwavering presence. One particular evening, I found him sitting on the old wooden bench near the river, the same bench I often used for my solitary reflections. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, casting a golden glow upon the tranquil water. I felt the familiar weariness of a long day's work in my bones. But instead of heading straight home, I found myself drawn towards him, my feet moving almost instinctively. "Why do you come here every day?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could censor them. He looked at me, his eyes soft and understanding, and smiled. "Because I want to," he said, his voice gentle. His answer, so simple and direct, struck me as illogical. "You don't even know me," I argued, a hint of confusion in my tone. He tilted his head slightly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Maybe I do," he replied, a subtle challenge in his words. I shook my head, a definite no. "No, you don't," I insisted. He was quiet for a moment, just looking at me, his gaze patient. Then he said, his voice calm and steady, "Maybe you think people always leave, but I am still here." His words landed with a quiet force, making my chest feel unexpectedly heavy. It was a strange, new sensation, a mix of something akin to vulnerability and a flicker of something else. I didn't know why. I couldn't find a response. I just sat down next to him on the bench, the space between us shrinking, becoming less daunting. The sky slowly deepened into shades of dark blue, the last remnants of daylight fading. And we remained there, side by side, in comfortable silence. The next day, true to his word, he brought me tea, a warm, steaming cup of fragrant tea, placed carefully on my workbench, just as he had done with the coffee. I looked at it for a long moment, the steam rising in delicate curls. Then, for the very first time, I reached out and picked it up. The warmth spread through my hands, a comforting sensation. I took a small sip. It was a simple act, but it felt monumental. He smiled then, a gentle, knowing smile, but he didn't say anything, didn't press for a reaction. He didn't need to. Something was undeniably changing within me, a slow, almost imperceptible shift. I didn't fully understand what it was, but for the first time, I didn't feel entirely alone. His steady, quiet presence was slowly, gently, chipping away at the walls I had built. He was becoming a quiet, yet significant part of my daily life, a rhythm I hadn't known I craved. I hadn't expected it, but now I instinctively noticed when he wasn't there. Every morning, I would unconsciously anticipate his arrival at the shop. Every evening, I would find myself drawn to the river, half expecting to see him there. He talked sometimes, sharing small observations or simple stories, but never too much. He never asked probing questions that I didn't want to answer, never pushed me to speak when I preferred silence. He was simply there, a constant, undemanding presence, and I, surprisingly, let him be. One day, he arrived later than usual. I was deep in the middle of fixing a car, my hands busy with grease and metal, but my eyes kept darting to the shop door, a subconscious search for his familiar figure. He wasn't there. I told myself it didn't matter, that his absence meant nothing. I tried to work harder, to push away the strange, unsettling feeling that was beginning to form in my chest, a subtle ache I couldn't quite identify. But the hours crawled by, slow and heavy, and he never appeared. I began to tell myself the familiar, protective lies. He's just busy. Maybe he found something better to do. Maybe he finally got tired of coming here. Maybe he finally left. The thought of him leaving, of his quiet presence simply vanishing, echoed in my mind, louder and more insistent than I liked. But then, in the early evening, just as I was about to close the shop, he appeared. He walked in, a little slower than his usual brisk pace. "Sorry," he said, a faint apology in his voice. "I had something to do." I didn't ask what it was. I just nodded, a silent acknowledgement, and kept working, pretending to be fully absorbed in my task. But I noticed my hands were shaking ever so slightly. A tremor I couldn't control. I didn't know why. He watched me for a while, his gaze soft and patient. Then he placed something small on the table beside me. "A small box for you," he said. I frowned, my eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He simply smiled, a knowing, gentle smile. "Open it later," he advised. Then he turned and left, leaving me with the small box and a tangle of unarticulated feelings. That night, alone in my quiet room, I sat on my bed and looked at the box. It was small, unassuming, wrapped in simple brown paper. I hesitated for a long time, my fingers hovering over it, before I finally gathered the courage to open it. Inside, nestled on a soft bed of cotton, there was a keychain. It was a simple design, a small, elegant silver key hanging from a thin black string. It was unassuming, just like me, just like my simple life. I didn't truly understand why he had given it to me. What did a key symbolize in our unspoken connection? But I held it in my hand for a long, long time, feeling its cool, smooth weight, the subtle texture of the string. Then, with a feeling I couldn't quite name, I carefully placed it in my pocket, close to my heart. The next day, he was back at the shop, acting completely normal, as if the keychain, the box, the subtle shift in the air between us had never happened. I wanted to ask him about the keychain, to understand its meaning, but I didn't know how to begin. The words felt too big, too important to articulate. Instead, I just worked, pretending that everything was as it always had been. He watched, like always, but something was undeniably different now. I could feel it, a subtle hum beneath the surface, a quiet awareness that had changed everything. One quiet evening, as we sat by the river, the last light of day fading from the sky, he asked a question that brought me back to my childhood fears. "Do you ever think about leaving this town?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. I looked at him, confused. Why would I leave? Why? I simply asked. He shrugged, a casual gesture that belied the weight of his question. "Just wondering, do you ever want to see other places, new sights, different lives?" I shook my head, my answer coming instinctively. "This is my home," I stated, a fundamental truth I had always believed. He smiled then, a soft, knowing smile. "Home is not always a place, Noor," he said. I didn't fully understand what he meant, not in that moment, but his words lingered, a seed planted in my mind. I didn't ask for further explanation. I just absorbed his words, letting them settle. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. He continued to come to the shop, to sit by the river, and something deep inside me, that quiet, stubborn part of me that had always pushed everyone away, kept changing. The walls I had so carefully built around my heart began to soften, to crumble, almost imperceptibly. I didn't push him away anymore. When he spoke, I truly listened, not just to his words, but to the emotions behind them. When he brought tea, I drank it, finding comfort in the simple ritual. When he sat by the river, I sat there with him. The silence between us no longer empty, but full and comfortable. It felt natural, easy, like breathing. Then, one day, my father, in a rare moment of direct observation, said something that truly surprised me. He was watching us from the corner of the shop, his eyes thoughtful. "He cares about you, Noor," he said simply. I frowned, trying to dismiss his words. "He's just friendly, Baba," I replied, my voice a little too quick. My father shook his head, a gesture of quiet certainty. "No, Noor, it is more than that." I didn't answer him. I didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to explore the implications of his words. But I did. His words echoed in my mind throughout the rest of the day, a persistent whisper. That evening, when I saw him by the river, walking towards the familiar bench, I found myself walking faster than usual, an eagerness I didn't recognize. He smiled when he saw me, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. I sat down next to him, the space between us now feeling familiar and comfortable. We watched the water together, the soft sounds of the river flowing past, a comforting backdrop to our quiet companionship. Then, without even thinking, almost instinctively, I reached into my pocket and held the keychain he had given me. I didn't know why, but it felt important, a silent symbol of something growing, something precious between us. He saw it in my hand and his smile widened, a joyful light in his eyes. "You kept it," he said, a hint of surprise and pleasure in his voice. I nodded, a simple, clear affirmation. "Yes," I replied. The sun was beginning its final descent, painting the sky in fiery orange and soft pink hues, creating a breathtaking canvas above us. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and river water. I looked at him, truly looked at him, meeting his gaze directly, and for the very first time, I asked him the question that had been in my mind for so long, the question that held so much weight for me. "Why do you stay?" He didn't look surprised by my question. He just smiled, that same soft, gentle smile that had first drawn me in, and said, Because I want to. And in that moment, looking into his steady, kind eyes, I believed him completely. There was no doubt, no hidden agenda, just a simple, profound truth. He was still there, a constant, unwavering presence in my life. Every day he came to the shop, his arrival now a highlight of my morning. Every evening he sat by the river, his presence making my usual solitude feel comforting rather than lonely. And every time I felt something new, something deeper. It was small at first, just a faint thought, a subtle flutter in my chest. But it grew steadily, undeniably. I started actively waiting for him, my gaze drifting to the door more often. I started listening more carefully when he talked, trying to absorb every word, every nuance of his voice. I started looking for him before he even arrived, my heart quickening at the thought of seeing him. It was strange, this powerful new feeling. I didn't know what it meant, and I was deeply afraid to even ask myself, for fear of what the answer might reveal. One particularly gray day, it rained. The shop was quiet. The drumming of raindrops on the tin roof, the only sound. No cars came in for repairs. And my father, seeing the slow day, decided to go home early, leaving me alone in the vast, echoing space. I sat there, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain, a sound that usually brought me a sense of peace. I told myself, almost as a matter of fact, he won't come today. No one walks in the rain. But then, through the blurred glass of the shop door, I saw him. He was standing there, completely drenched from the downpour, his hair plastered to his forehead, but smiling brightly. "You're still here," he said, his voice a little hoarse from the damp air, but full of warmth. I frowned, a little concerned despite myself. "You're wet," I stating the obvious. He laughed softly. "Yes, I know," he replied, as if being soaped to the bone was a perfectly normal state. I sighed, a mixture of exasperation and a hidden warmth in my chest, and went inside to grab a dry towel for him. He took it gratefully, dried his face and hair, and then, without being asked, sat on the old wooden chair near my workbench, making himself comfortable. He didn't say anything for a while. He simply sat there, listening to the rain with me, his presence a comforting anchor in the quiet shop. Then he spoke, his voice gentle and thoughtful. "Do you ever feel lonely, Noor?" The question caught me completely off guard. It was so direct, so personal, hitting a core of my guarded existence. I didn't answer at first. I have never allowed myself to truly think about that word. I had always been alone. That was true, by choice even. But was I lonely? I had always fiercely told myself no. "No," I said finally, the word feeling a little foreign and hollow as it left my lips. "I don't need people." He looked at me then, his eyes soft, understanding, but also a little sad. "But you let me stay," he said, his voice a quiet observation rather than an accusation. I opened my mouth to argue, to deny it, to push back against his words. But I stopped. He was right. I had never told him to leave. I had never pushed him away. Not truly. He was different, truly different from anyone I had ever met, and I still didn't fully understand why I had allowed him to be so close, to enter my carefully constructed world. The rain continued to fall steadily, a gray curtain outside. The shop was usually cold and damp on such days, but with him sitting there, listening, just being there, it felt undeniably warm, a quiet warmth that spread through me. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. For the very first time in my life, silence did not feel empty. It felt full, full of something I didn't yet understand, but something undeniably important, something I instinctively wanted to hold onto. Days passed, and my observations of him deepened. I started noticing even more small, intimate details about his personality. I noticed how he laughed softly, almost to himself, a little nervous giggle when he was thinking deeply or slightly embarrassed. I noticed how he would habitually look up at the sky, his eyes lost in thought, when he was trying to figure something out, or simply contemplating the world. I noticed how he always, without fail, sat in the exact same spot on the old wooden bench by the river, as if that specific place belonged to him, or perhaps to us. These small, seemingly insignificant details began to accumulate in my mind. They stayed there, lingering, refusing to leave, no matter how much I tried to push them away or ignore their presence. They became a part of my daily thoughts, woven into the fabric of my quiet life. One evening, he was unusually quiet. He sat by the river, his gaze fixed on the water, his usual cheerful energy subdued. I sat next to him, feeling a strange, unfamiliar worry begin to prickle at me. "What's wrong?" I asked, breaking the comfortable silence between us. He sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. "Nothing," he said, "just thinking." I waited patiently, hoping he would say more, hoping he would share whatever was bothering him, but he didn't. So I just sat there, my gaze following his to the changing colors of the sky as the sun dipped lower below the horizon. The air was cool, a gentle wind rustling through the leaves of the trees. It felt peaceful, but there was an underlying tension, a subtle shift in his usual calm presence. And he turned to me, his gaze serious, almost solemn. He used my name, which he rarely did when he was serious. "Noor," he said softly, "if I leave one day, will you miss me?" The question hit me with the force of a crashing wave, completely unprepared. I stared at him, my mind suddenly blank, unable to form a coherent thought. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I don't care. To retreat behind the familiar walls of indifference. But the words wouldn't come out. They simply wouldn't form on my tongue. I didn't know what to say, what truth to reveal. So I said nothing. He smiled then, but it was a different smile this time. It was tinged with a deep, quiet sadness, a knowing sorrow. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice gentle and understanding. "I already know the answer." That night, sleep was a distant dream. His words, especially that last sad smile, stayed in my mind, replaying over and over, an endless, tormenting loop. I tried desperately to forget them, to push them away, to bury them deep beneath my usual defenses, but they clung to me, stubbornly refusing to disappear. I tossed and turned in my bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, the silence of my room amplifying the thoughts in my head. And for the very first time in my entire life, I allowed myself to ask a question I had never dared to consider, a question that now terrified me. What if he leaves? And in that moment, for the very first time, I was truly, deeply afraid of the answer. A cold, aching fear settled in the pit of my stomach. A sensation utterly new and unwelcome. He didn't come that morning. The shop felt quiet, too quiet, even with the familiar sounds of engines humming and tools clanging. I tried to focus on my work, to immerse myself in the mechanics of the cars, but my eyes kept darting to the door, a constant, unspoken plea. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just busy. Maybe he would come later. But the hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last, and he never appeared. The shop felt empty, even when it was full of customers and cars. The river, when I walked by it during my lunch break, felt strangely desolate, even with the wind moving the water, creating ripples on its surface. Something essential was missing, a vital piece of my newly formed routine. Something I didn't even want to name, for fear of giving it too much power. The next day, he was still gone. I waited, my gaze fixed on the door, a desperate hope flickering within me. But he didn't come. I told myself sternly that I didn't care. I told myself it didn't matter, that his absence changed nothing. But it did. Oh, how profoundly it did. That evening, unable to bear the emptiness of the shop, I found myself walking to the river, a magnet drawn to a familiar comfort. His spot on the bench, the old wooden one where we often sat together, was empty. It was a stark, silent reminder of his absence. The air felt colder than before, carrying a chill that seeped into my bones, a reflection of the chill in my heart. The sky was a heavy, mournful gray, mirroring the emotional landscape within me. I sat there on that cold, empty bench, waiting for no one. The water moved slowly, deliberately, the wind whispering mournfully through the trees, creating lonely, melancholic sounds. But nothing felt the same. Everything felt muted, dull, stripped of its previous warmth and meaning. Then I saw it, a small, neatly folded note tucked carefully on the very edge of the bench. My hands felt heavy, almost numb with anticipation and fear, as I reached out and picked it up. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if it had been clutched tightly, or perhaps caught by a gust of wind before being placed there. My heart, already a frantic drum in my chest, beat even faster as I unfolded it and read the familiar handwriting. "I had to leave," the note began, the words stark and clear. "But I was right. You will miss me." I read it again, and again, and again. The words seared themselves into my mind, a confirmation of a truth I had desperately tried to deny. My chest felt tight, an agonizing pressure building, as if a heavy weight was pressing down on my lungs. My hands shook so much that the note trembled violently. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to pretend it didn't matter, to convince myself that his leaving had changed nothing in my life, that I was still the same solitary, self-sufficient Noor. But I couldn't, because he was right. I did miss him. I missed his voice, his quiet, comforting presence, the way he always sat in the same spot by the river, making it feel like our place. I missed the way he looked at me, with those soft, understanding eyes, as if he knew something deep and profound about me that I hadn't even fully understood myself. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat alone on my bed, the small keychain he had given me clutched tightly in my hand. I turned it over and over in my fingers, feeling its cool, smooth weight, the subtle texture of the black string. He was gone, truly gone from my physical world, but he was still here. He was here in my thoughts, a constant, echoing presence in my mind. He was here in my heart, a warmth I hadn't known I craved until it was almost taken away. I had spent years, my entire life, meticulously building walls, keeping people away, believing that was the only way to protect myself from the pain of loss. I had spent my whole life believing I didn't need anyone, that being alone was the safest, most peaceful way to exist. But now, in the quiet solitude of my room, holding that simple key, I knew the undeniable truth. My heart was no longer closed. It had opened, slowly, gently, almost imperceptibly, without me even realizing it was happening. And now, the most terrifying realization of all. I didn't know how to close it again. The key he gave me, it wasn't just a trinket. It was a key to something inside me. Something I didn't even know existed until he, with his quiet persistence, unlocked it. And now, my heart once a fortress, was vulnerable, exposed, and yearning. Thank you for joining us today on Easy English Podcast. We hope this story resonated with you and offered you a chance to immerse yourself in English listening. It's a powerful reminder that even the most guarded hearts can find connection and change in unexpected ways. Join us next time for another inspiring tale designed to help you on your language learning journey. Until then, keep practicing your English and take care.